When discussing globalization theoretically, scholars often take one of three main positions: hyperglobalization, transformationalism, or skepticism. These perspectives differ in how they view the spread, impact, and inevitability of globalization. Hyperglobalization is the belief that globalization is an unstoppable and far reaching process. Scholars who support this view often describe globalization as an incessant march across the globe, suggesting it is a necessary and inevitable phenomenon. They see globalization as something that will eventually affect every corner of the world, leading to what they describe as a globalizing imperative. This perspective also anticipates the eventual end of the traditional nation state as globalization takes over. Transformationalism takes a different stance, acknowledging that globalization is changing nation states, but not to the extent that they are completely overtaken. Scholars in this group believe that while globalization brings significant and often irreversible changes to nation states, these changes do not imply the complete erasure or end of national identities and structures. Instead, they emphasize the ways in which globalization transforms these entities without entirely dismantling them. Skepticism challenges both of these perspectives, questioning the extent and impact of globalization. Scholars who are skeptical do not believe that globalization has as profound an influence as others claim. They reject the idea of an unstoppable globalization process or a globalizing imperative. Instead, they argue that the nation state remains largely resilient and that globalization's reach is often overstated. Globalization itself is driven by various processes, primarily economic flows, internationalism, and information exchange. Economic flows refer to the movement of goods, services, and capital across borders. Internationalism highlights the growing importance of international organizations and multinational corporations, which often wield significant power in shaping globalization. Information exchange, particularly the rapid global transmission of electronic data, has played a crucial role in enabling globalization, making it possible for ideas, culture, and commerce to spread on a scale never seen before. One important concept linked to globalization is neoliberalism, which emphasizes the opening of national markets and reducing barriers to trade and investment. Neoliberalism supports deregulating capital flows, minimizing trade restrictions, and granting more rights to investors. This economic framework underpins much of contemporary globalization, ensuring that markets are interconnected and competitive. When it comes to culture, globalization has had profound effects, often treating culture as an economic good. This means that cultural products, forms, and practices are increasingly marketed and traded globally, much like physical goods. There is a reduction in restrictions on cultural imports and minimal protection for national cultural forms. Joint ventures and mergers in cultural industries, including education, are encouraged, leading to the blending and shared cultural practices. However, this also means nations have less cultural autonomy as global forces often dominate cultural production and distribution. Scholars like Diana Crane highlight how this phenomenon mirrors neoliberal economic globalization. She refers to this as cultural neoliberalization, where globalization leads to the production and spread of globally transmitted cultures. These cultures often originate from a central dominant hub and are then disseminated worldwide, creating a shared but unequal cultural landscape. This interplay between culture and economics underscores the complex and multifaceted nature of globalization. Culture incorporates much of the vocabulary associated with contemporary social and cultural changes such as post-Fordism, post industrial society, and post modernization. These terms highlight the discourse surrounding social and cultural transformations. Cultural studies aim to understand these changes at the level of culture. This exploration is not limited to globalization but extends to areas such as consumer culture, power dynamics in consumption, global culture, and the influence of cultural imperialism. The questions revolve around what controls cultural sources and how accessibility and limitations shape global culture. These topics are fundamental to the framework of cultural studies, addressing issues like cultural imperialism and the balance between national cultures and internationalism. Globalization introduces a paradox when viewed from a cultural perspective. On one hand, it compresses the world, creating a sense of proximity and accessibility due to the flow of information and international connections. On the other hand, it widens global interactions through economic exchanges and technological advancements. This duality highlights the complex nature of globalization, where the interconnectedness of nations coexists with the compression of geographical and cultural distances. Despite this increased connectivity, globalization often brings uncertainty, contingency, and chaos, replacing traditional notions of order and stability. Arjun Appadurai provides a useful framework for understanding globalization by describing it as a series of disjunctive flows. These flows, characterized by their lack of direct connection, include ethnoscapes, that is, movement of people, technoscapes, technology, financescapes, financial flows, mediascapes, media distribution, and ideoscapes, ideologies. While these flows operate autonomously, they collectively shape the global cultural landscape. Appadurai emphasizes that globalization cannot be understood through linear or systematic models. Instead, it is best viewed as a chaotic and overdetermined process where multiple, often hidden, causes influence cultural phenomena. The idea of overdetermination, borrowed from chaos theory, suggests that cultural phenomena are influenced by more causes than we can identify. This complexity makes it challenging to fully analyze or predict cultural flows. Rather than being a straightforward process, globalization involves randomness and unpredictability. Cultural studies focus on critiquing and understanding these chaotic conditions rather than seeking simple explanations. Hybridization emerges as a key concept in the discourse of globalization. Unlike earlier notions of cultural imperialism, which suggested domination and homogenization, hybridization here acknowledges the blending of cultural elements across nations. This blending results from the free flow of cultural information and interactions, creating diverse and dynamic cultural landscapes. While globalization has often been criticized for promoting uniformity, forces of fragmentation and hybridity counterbalance these trends, demonstrating that cultural flows are neither one directional nor entirely homogenizing. The globalized world requires an understanding of cultural interactions as complex, fragmented, and hybrid. The push and pull, compression and widening, connection and disjunction define the cultural dynamics of globalization. Rather than viewing it as a linear process of domination or homogenization, globalization must be seen as a nuanced phenomenon that reshapes culture in multifaceted ways.